This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
As supporters of the Burkina Faso coup celebrate, two groups have come out to demand a return to constitutional order. Reports emerge of renewed fighting in northern Ethiopia. And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he won't resign yet over Downing Street party scandal. This is Africa Live. Hello and thank you for joining us. I am Peninah Karibe, and with me with a sneak peek of what's ahead in business news is Uche.
Thanks, Peninah. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live, please. South Africa finds that almost a third of health equipment contracts awarded during the pandemic were irregular. And a look at the little-known crop in Ethiopia that holds the answer to food scarcity. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now,
thank you, Uche. We begin the hour in Burkina Faso, where two groups came out to demand a return to constitutional order following a military coup on Monday. The days following the coup have been characterized by massive celebrations by citizens who support the military. But the Convention of Non-Governmental Organizations for the Observation of Domestic Elections and the Coalition of Democratic Patriots came out Wednesday to demand the safety of the ousted President Roch Kabore, among other demands. Here's part of the statement by one of the groups.
Our coalition, faithful to its democratic convictions and attached to Republican values, takes national and international opinion to witness and vigorously condemns all forms of seizure of power by any means other than the vote of the ballot box through true, transparent democratic elections, inclusive and open. On the basis of this principle, we condemn this coup de force, which constitutes a real democratic setback.
Let's go live to Burkina Faso's capital, Ouagadougou, where we have Tanga Kafando, a local journalist. He joins us via Skype. Tanga, two groups coming out today to denounce the coup. How much do we know about these groups, and what do we expect the military leaders to respond?
Yes, the first group is CODEL, that is the Convention of Non-Governmental Organization, an association of many civil society organizations, and the second one is a trade union organization. This trade union organization called l'Union Syndicale played an important role during the resistance against the coup of September 2015. So I think it's a condemnation of principle because they are defining themselves as advocates of democracy, and it's normal for them to condemn the coup.
How is the situation in the country today?
Yes, the situation is calm. People are going back to the business. According to some local media, the military has started the consultation with the different components of the society. But for the time being, people are waiting for the first step of the militaries, the first actions of the militaries. So people are going to the business, waiting for the first steps and the first action of the militaries.
Oh, I thank you for that. We've been speaking to Tanga Kafando, a local journalist based in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital. The military takeover in Burkina Faso has had many people asking, who is Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba? CGTN's Joy Kirukijuma unearths the little known about him.
41-year-old Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba is Burkina Faso's new junta leader. He has had first-hand experience of the country's brutal jihadist insurgency. This he cites as the reason for seizing power. Damiba heads the Patriotic Movement for Preservation and Restoration (MPSR) that on Monday overthrew the country's elected president, Roch Marc Christian Kabore. Kabore was facing public anger at his failure to stem insecurity. Damiba is commander of the 3rd Military Region, which covers eastern Burkina Faso, one of the areas worst affected by insurgency. He gained experience of the problems of Burkina Faso's poorly trained and ill-equipped security forces against ruthless and highly mobile militants. According to a military source, Damiba made no secret of his criticism of prevailing strategies to roll back the insurgency before the coup. Damiba trained at the St. George's Nomaono Military Academy in Po, southern Burkina. Many of his alumni served in the Presidential Security Regiment. He was a former presidential guard of Kabore's predecessor, Blaise Compaoré, who was overthrown by a popular uprising in 2014. Damiba also has close affiliations with France. He trained at the prestigious military school of Paris. He published a book last June titled West African Armies and Terrorism, Uncertain Answers. The French publisher says Damiba also earned a master's degree in criminal science at the CNAM Academy in France. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
Meanwhile, EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell on Wednesday co-chaired a ministerial meeting of the G5 Sahel group in Brussels. The meeting comes as military coups continue to rattle the Sahel. To shed more light on the coups in the West African region, we earlier spoke to Dr. Andrew Yao Che, a senior fellow at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs, and here's what he had to say.
I think it's important first that we separate the G5 Sahel from other governance issues. Yes, the G5 Sahel is made up of 5 countries, which compose of trying to settle armed conflict within the region, but also the G5 Sahel's mandate is really to enforce the mission's ability, in this case, to support wider development and continuity of regional securities. So if you separate the two, then really the G5 Sahel is the security side of things, in conjunction with other aspects with the UN and other regional forces that are in place. So really this is the governance, I would argue, issue that is taking place in the region on the Sahel. And this is really off the backdrop of, you have already mentioned, of popular support from civilians for these types of coups, which really is an indication of, to some extent, that the democratic gains that many have argued that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 decades actually haven't really solidified the democracy that we would expect for the Sahel, but particularly for the Francophone countries, because this is in particular in relation to Guinea, Mali, Chad, who are all Francophone countries as well. I think it's because there has been increased levels of violence being witnessed with no end in sight. So civilians are experiencing indiscriminate violence at severe levels, and that has continued. If you take Burkina Faso, for example, the original situation was, or instability was originally in Mali and made its way into Burkina Faso, and that instability continues. There's been a lack of governance, a lack of strong institutional building within or by these states as well. And I would say it's also being compounded by economic difficulties and other factors like COVID and continued corruption, which civilians have continued to cite as an issue as well. I think sanctions to a degree have worked in some cases, not fully. I think in Mali, you are seeing some of that hit some of the people's pockets and trading and whatnot. So obviously Guinea has kept its borders open to Mali, which has allowed Mali to continue to exist, just should I say, to trade. But they're not as targeted as, let's say, UN or UK sanctions that oftentimes hit the elites or are targeted to particular groups. So I think that doesn't help. But also, I think the wide issue that ECOWAS hasn't always been consistent here. While it's been the most vocal regional economic community, or should I say, economic mechanism in the African or across the African continent, it has been inconsistent when it comes to places like Guinea or Ivory Coast, where you see the extension of term times being extended from 2 to 3 terms. And I think this, to a large extent, has weakened the institution's own positioning, but has allowed, with the support of civilians, the coup leaders to feel emboldened to take the steps that they're doing. And Mali is that indication that we have here.
And News Justin indicate that the Burkina Faso Minister for Defense, Barthelme Simpore, has been arrested by the military. We'll have more for you later. Fresh fighting has reportedly resumed in northern Ethiopia, threatening the distribution of humanitarian aid. Fighters from the rebel TPLF based in the Tigray region have confirmed fighting, claiming they were responding to attacks on their positions by pro-government forces in the neighboring region of Afar. Afar authorities have accused the TPLF of attacking towns located on the border with Tigray.
The accusations and counter-accusations are coming both from the TPLF side and the Ethiopian government side. As you've said, the conflict has resumed. This can be reported now, but it is in the Afar regional state between the Afar Special Force and the TPLF fighters themselves. The Afar regional state has officially reported that TPLF fighters have been firing machine guns and also using heavy weaponry to attack different locations, including civilian locations in the Afar regional state, killing perhaps scores of people. The TPLF is saying that they are responding an attack waged by the Special Force of Afar, so they have continued the fighting. But in the middle of it all, the problem now is the humanitarian activity is being disrupted. So in general terms, what we can confirm is, although war has subsided in almost all areas in the northern part of Ethiopia, which stayed for more than perhaps a year, there is now a beginning of yet another round of conflict between the Afar regional state and also the Tigray regional state fighters. There are two ways of explaining the peace process. One is a domestic initiative, which is called an all-inclusive national dialogue. This is the government's initiative, which is now under preparation as per the Parliament's endorsement of the rules of engagement. And almost all parties, including those in the Tigray regional state, are invited to take part in this dialogue, a national dialogue, which may or may not include TPLF itself, but there are also other opposition political parties based in the Tigray regional state that are expected to take part. The other one is, as we've said, the African Union initiative, led by former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo himself. President Obasanjo has been, undertaking shuttle diplomacy between Addis Ababa and Mekelle, the headquarters of TPLF, that is, speaking the rebels and also the federal government, including Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed himself. There were proposals the last time we've heard that the government and the TPLF leadership was expecting from Mr. Obasanjo so that he can show the way that, according to him, what would be a viable or trusted way of bringing these two parties for a round table discussion. But so far as we know, that initiative seems to be stalled somewhere. We have to hear from the African Union what they have to explain about this, but so far there is no progress from their side. But the internal dialogue, the domestic initiative itself, seems to be happening anytime soon, as the government freed opposition leaders from prison, including those which belong to the TPLF, and others are also considering ways of engaging with the government. So the peace initiative has two phases. The domestic one seems to be progressing. The one from the African Union side, we have to wait and hear.
South Sudan's government says intercommunal violence in the eastern part of the country has left 32 people dead. The attack occurred early this week by yet-to-be-identified armed men who also raided cattle from South Sudan's Jonglei state. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
Those killed during the armed raids include children and women. According to South Sudan's government, 3 children reportedly drowned in the river while fleeing the violence. South Sudan's government says there are people who are still unaccounted for. 26 people were wounded, 5 houses were burnt, and other property, including cattle, were looted. The attack on Baidit village has displaced thousands of people. President Salva Kiir has dispatched his interior minister to the area. The United Nations mission in South Sudan is calling on South Sudan's government to carry out timely investigations and that the perpetrators be held accountable. The violence in Jonglei state comes at a time when the country is just beginning to have relative peace after 6 years of civil war, which ended in 2018. The UN says all efforts must be made to restore calm and promote peace and reconciliation. It further says any surge in violence will have a devastating effect on communities that have already been negatively impacted by flooding, the COVID-19 pandemic, and recurring conflict. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Madagascar, Mozambique and Malawi are counting losses after a tropical storm ripped through the three nations. The storm, known as Anna, made landfall across the countries over the weekend. Authorities in Madagascar say at least 34 people have been killed, while Mozambique puts the death toll from the storm at 3. Malawi has not reported any fatalities, but the storm triggered major power cuts across the country. Thousands of people across the three countries remain stranded as heavy rains and floods swept their homes away. Chamgono tells us more.
Storm Anna, formed over the east coast of Africa's largest island, Madagascar, has brought heavy rains, causing flooding and mudslides in the capital and Antananarivo. Emergency evacuations have been launched as several low-lying districts of Madagascar's capital remain under high alert.
Our house is flooded with water. We have nowhere to go. We had to come here. Our children have fallen sick. We have no money at all. We don't earn anything. We can't go out to sell anything because there's a lot of water.
The reason we are staying here is because part of our house has collapsed. We are appealing for help. If we live here, we have nowhere else to go.
Across the Indian Ocean, heavy rains and strong winds were experienced in Mozambique's central and northern districts. Government and UN agencies estimate that 500,000 people may be impacted in the provinces of Nampula, Zambezia and Sofala. A clinic and 16 classrooms have been destroyed. In neighboring Malawi, the storm plunged most parts of the country into darkness. This is after flash floods raised the water levels, forcing the electric company to shut down its generators. Power is slowly being restored to residents across the country. Chamgono, CGTN.
In the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has refused to resign after a series of alleged lockdown-breaking parties at his Downing Street office and residence. He, however, agreed that ministers who knowingly misled Parliament should step down.
The Ministerial Code says that ministers who knowingly mislead Parliament will be expected to offer their resignation. Does the Prime Minister believe that applies to him?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, of course, but let me tell the House that I think he's inviting a question about an investigation which, as you know, Mr. Speaker, I can't comment, and on which he, as a lawyer, Mr. Speaker, will know that I can't comment on.
So, since he acknowledges the Ministerial Code applies to him, will he now resign?
Family members of victims of a boat accident that occurred in the Democratic Republic of Congo are pleading with the government to enforce strict measures to prevent marine accidents. At least 50 people died and more than 200 others were rescued in the accident that occurred in the northwestern province of Equator last Sunday. CGTN's Christo Chamringa reports.
A risky journey along the Congo River. Hundreds of Congolese living in the northwestern city of Mbandaka travel aboard these wooden boats daily to trade in major towns. But many died in a recent accident that occurred near Ipombo village. This family is mourning the loss of their daughter, Rodiasan Luzeze.
We got to an area called Ngele and recovered the body of our daughter last week. It was a very sad moment for us. We brought her body back to Bandaka, bought a coffin and buried her. Neither the boat owner nor the government gave us any contribution.
The daughter was among 50 passengers who were recently reported dead. Many others are still missing. The family members are now calling on the government to enforce navigation laws to prevent such accidents from recurring.
It's very sad that our government allows some of those old boats in very poor condition to carry passengers. Accidents happen all the time here. We hope they put a stop to this once and for all.
The authorities in Mbandaka City were not available to comment about the allegation of laxity in the enforcement of maritime laws. It is true that the port is always busy. This is a typical boat that the people of Mbandaka used to get to other villages and cities around the DRC. It has 2 decks and a capacity of around 700 people. Sailing becomes difficult when it's overloaded, especially when it encounters bad weather. River accidents are common in the DRC. Last year, 60 people died and more than 200 were reported missing after the boat they were in sank on the Congo River. The government called on sanctions against those responsible, but the accidents have continued. One of the captains of these boats is calling on his colleagues to be more cautious.
Each one of us steering boats should be more responsible. If you know that the maximum limit of your boat is 750 people, and then you go ahead and allow 900 people on board, then you are the problem. We should be the first ones to ensure the safety of our passengers.
Hopes of finding more survivors from the latest boat accident are fading a week after the disaster happened. For the Longumba family, the pain of losing their daughter is hard to endure because they had high hopes in her. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Mbandaka, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Egypt marked on Tuesday the 11th anniversary of the January 25th revolution that led to the overthrow of then Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak after 30 years in office. Yasser Hakim takes a look at what has been achieved from the revolution since then.
On January 25, 2011, millions of Egyptians from all socio-economic and political backgrounds began continuous protests countrywide to overthrow former President Hosni Mubarak. It lasted until February 11th, when Vice President Omar Suleiman announced that Mubarak has resigned after 30 years in power. It was an event that opened a new chapter for the people of the most populous Middle East and North African nation. Those in the streets at the time had 4 main demands: better living conditions, freedom, social justice, and human dignity. Tariq al-Kholi, a known activist during the revolution, says the aim was to make these demands a reality.
Each one of these demands represents the visions, the hopes and dreams for protesters back then. If we analyze what has been achieved, on the political front, the most evident is that there is more empowerment for youth and more political representation in parliament. Deputy ministers and deputy governors are young people, and the state is launching regular programs to create youth leaders in various sectors. Socially, there's been a social revolution with multiple legislations for social development, social justice, as well as projects and initiatives such as the Dignified Life Initiative. Then there was the tough period of aggressive economic reforms, a battle that we all went through and had to sacrifice to rebuild the damaged economy.
In his speech in this year's anniversary, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi acknowledged that some of the revolution goals are yet to be fulfilled.
The 25th of January revolution has expressed the Egyptian people's ambition to build a new future where they would enjoy a dignified living. The road is still long. What has been achieved with the economy and security is just a step in building the future that we seek, to place the foundations for a new republic that maintains the dignity of the Egyptian citizen and guarantees the best living conditions.
And al-Kholi, who is now a parliament member, agrees there are still challenges ahead.
We're still halfway. Not everything we've dreamed of has been realized. Our main challenge now is the economic development for higher living standards and improved social justice. We have done very well in national security and fighting terrorism. The state was very successful and restored stability and peace, political representation for youth, women and people with disabilities. What remains as the biggest challenge is the economy.
Egyptians are still divided on the effects of the revolution. Some believe it has brought welcomed political change to the North African nation by replacing corrupt leaders. Others say it has pushed the development process back 20 years, with the instability that followed, including having a second uprising, 3 presidents and a war on terrorism. But there's an agreement on what should come.
We cannot deny there are a lot of advantages. There are big improvements in security, infrastructure, in transport, railway, and in rebuilding the country. But there are negatives. The value of the Egyptian pound has dropped significantly. The cost of living has increased. Yes, there are salary increases, but still prices are high.
The dignified living and the 100 million health initiatives for the poor are a good response to the demand we wanted and go a long way to improve people's lives. What the government should work on going forward is building the people, the new generation, start growing from down up, give more attention to health and education services, and tackle the challenges. President Sisi and the government are working on it, but we want more effort to stop price hikes and to improve living conditions.
In spite of the mixed reactions towards the impact of the January 25th revolution on Egypt 11 years on, it will always remain a pivotal point in Egypt's modern history. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Thanks to Nigeria's first civil service reform in 13 years, fathers are spending time with their newborn children. After much debate, the country passed a law allowing men who work for the federal government to take 14 days paid paternity leave. Our correspondent Tesem Akende reports.
Godwin Ibrahim and his wife Faith have come to the clinic together to take their baby boy for a postnatal examination. Matthew is their first child, and Godwin, a civil servant, is taking paid paternity leave to be with his family.
We really appreciate the federal government for this paternity leave that he gave to us, because we have a time to go close to our wife and our child.
In September, the government approved 14 days of paternity leave for fathers. Mothers already were entitled to 4 months of maternity leave. It's one of the major reforms introduced by the government after many years of debate around the issue.
Children are, like we said, a blank canvas, and they get to bond better with those who are in their immediate environment. And I believe fathers being part of the child care at birth, beyond just, the few hours they may spend in the morning or in the evening with their families, is going to be of much importance, not just to the child's well-being, but to the mothers as well.
Abigail Ikenum explains there was significant resistance to the legislation, which now makes it compulsory for civil servants to take the leave.
I also believe it's taking us a while to get here because of our culture and belief system, in the men being the macho or the ones who are not very involved in the family system. Men always go out to look for food or any living to support the mother and kids.
The new paternity leave law is mandatory for civil servants. Private companies in Nigeria are free to grant the leave, but they are not required to do so.
The Nigeria Labour Congress is calling on the government to extend the new directive on paternity leave to private companies too.
Public health experts say if fathers like Godwin Ibrahim use their paternity leave to bond with their children and to help take care of them, it will help new families like his get off to a good start. Tesem Akende, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
China's assistance to Zimbabwe in the medical sphere has seen the construction of hospitals, donations of essential drugs and equipment, and training of health professionals. Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, China has stepped up the support to include vaccine donations and a US $500,000 upgrade of Wilkins Hospital, Zimbabwe's national COVID-19 treatment facility. Farima Kutuya reports.
When Wilkins Hospital was chosen by the government of Zimbabwe to handle COVID-19 cases, the Chinese business community, through the Chinese embassy in Zimbabwe, took it upon itself to mobilize funding to renovate the poorly equipped hospital to manage the pandemic. Chinese assistance has seen more than $500,000 US pumped into this facility. That's included the provision of life-saving machinery as well as the repair and refurbishment of critical equipment. Hospital capacity was increased from 35 to 60 beds, 10 of which are previously unavailable intensive care units.
There was need for a lot of attention here because things were built years ago. So we're looking at plumbing systems, we're looking at carpentry, electricals, and all those needed attention. And also looking at upgrading the facility to look after the very sick, those that are critically ill, intensive care facilities for ventilating those that would be in severe respiratory distress. So all those areas needed to be looked at. And the Chinese embassy and the Chinese people came forward and said, look, we can take this to another level.
6 ventilators and oxygen concentrators were procured. Piped oxygen was brought in and backup power was installed in just a few weeks as contractors rushed to ready the hospital to mitigate rising infections. The facelift has lightened the load for caregivers and also created a safer work environment.
You know, it boosts our morale to work in a clean and nice environment. It just boosts your morale, and in terms of offering the nursing services, it's now much, much better. The piped oxygen, whereby it reduces the workload, whereby you'll be able to wheel the cylinders to the patient, and the ventilator, you can just monitor the vital orbs on a monitor without doing the actual observations. It will just give you a signal if there's something wrong, and would rectify it there and then.
Apart from refurbishing Wilkins Hospital, China has also brought in medical experts to train and share ideas on the pandemic with local counterparts. It has also enabled Zimbabwe to roll out its vaccination program by donating millions of vaccine doses since February 2021. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Well, it's time now for business news. Let's go to Uche for the latest.
Thanks, Peninah. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. South Africa finds that almost a third of health equipment contracts awarded during the pandemic were irregular. And a look at the little-known crop in Ethiopia that holds the answer to food scarcity.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Well, let's start off in South Africa, where an investigation into some of the health equipment contracts that were awarded by the government during the COVID-19 pandemic have been found that almost two-thirds of them were irregular. Now, according to a probe by the Special Investigation Unit, over 2,000 deals worth $935 million were improper. The presidency now says that the National Prosecuting Authority and other law enforcement agencies may use the investigation to file criminal charges against people in the public and private sectors. And still in South Africa, fixed line and mobile operator Telkom is responding to an investigation into allegations of corruption and malfeasance in its affairs stretching back to 2006. Now, the company says it is awaiting further clarity on the scope of the investigation. The firm also says it will deal with the investigation merits in the appropriate forum, in an appropriate manner, and at the appropriate time. Now, in a surprise move on Tuesday, President Cyril Ramaphosa authorized the Special Investigating Unit to probe Telkom's ill-fated foray in Nigeria and Mauritius. The charges include improper or unlawful conduct by employees, officials, or agents of Telkom, and the unlawful appropriation or expenditure of public money or property. And the Northwest province in South Africa is home to more than 50% of all the known global reserves of platinum. Industry stakeholders got together recently for an investment conference to look at the challenges and the opportunities in the sector. Here's CGTN's Angela Coppola with more.
The Mineral Resources Minister says that investment in the mineral sector is a process.
We're in that process now of actively trying to invite investors to the mining and energy sector. And I think we should continue working hard, continue focusing, continue inviting investors. If we do that in the medium to long term, we'll see the results.
But is the government doing enough to attract new foreign direct investment, or is it about team effort?
An investment conference like this focused on how we can work together to do more, both parties, and I think working separately will probably not achieve that much. Working together in collaboration will certainly achieve more and be more successful in our objective to grow the economy.
The conference was disrupted at one point by disgruntled community members who barged into the venue demanding an audience with the minister. It doesn't send the right message to potential investors.
Who are actually employed in the mines, and they are not benefiting the community as they've promised. Because the issue of mining in Dabas being held is going on, it's going on, it's going on, and the communities are getting poorer and poorer. Yet we are being told of the dividends and the amounts of monies that is being spent to renew and rebuild communities, but we do not see them.
Mines in South Africa have a responsibility to keep communities located around mines in good health, financially and socially.
I think it's absolutely critical to involve them. We've seen that. I mean, unemployment around the mines is very high. The more successful, ironically, the more successful the mines are, the more they attract people, which actually increases the unemployment. And that will destabilize the community. So we have to work with them and ensure some of that wealth that we create for the country does go to the local communities, and they can see that change.
The mining exploration sector is struggling to find traction, and it's also a challenge in the energy sector after Shell lost a court battle to explore for offshore gas recently.
We need investment in exploration for gas and oil and for minerals. So whether it is Shell or it's the new one that is initiated in the West Coast, which has nothing to do with Shell, it's the same thing. Those who are taking those investments to court, it's a strategy of killing investment through courts. And we must actually confront that reality until we win the battle.
The South African mining sector is investing in new developments and infrastructure, using the proceeds from that bumper commodity prices. It's now time to find some new foreign direct investment. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Rustenburg, South Africa.
And heading to Nigeria now, the country's petroleum ministry says that it plans to amend a newly signed oil legislation to ask Parliament for an 18-month extension to keep its long-standing regime of subsidizing imported petrol. Now, the law, which was signed by President Muhammadu Buhari last year, contained a provision for the elimination of fuel subsidies within 6 months, but labor unions rejected the planned hike in pump prices. They threatened nationwide protest and urged authorities to speed up work on upgrading Nigeria's 4 refineries. Now, the country's presidential election is set for early next year, and analysts agree that removing that subsidy will have been a politically sensitive move, which could add fuel to the country's double-digit inflation. Finance Minister Zainab Ahmed has said that petrol subsidies are costing Nigeria up to $7 billion annually. And Uganda's real estate sector is picking up after a 2-year COVID-19 pandemic fallout. Real estate developers there say there is a growing demand for commercial showroom space and residential apartments. Here's CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga reporting.
Wilberforce Nsamba is a property developer. He's putting up this new residential estate outside the capital, Kampala.
The demand has come up, but also signing of the ECOP treaty of the oil pipeline. We are seeing more international companies and expatriates coming on and looking for their office and residential spaces.
But despite the COVID-19 pandemic restrictions, this neighborhood is fast transforming into a high-end residential area. Developers here say to keep in business, they are handing out concessions to tenants.
We've given them rent-free periods. We've come up with adjustable and flexible payment plans to make sure that they're able to stay with us longer, but also we've reduced the prices of rent and the prices of office spaces per square meter to make sure that at least more people can take up the vacant spaces as we recover.
A one-bedroom rental apartment here costs about $250. Uganda has fully reopened its economy after nearly 2 years of pandemic-related restrictions, and developers here are pushing to have these apartments completed so that they can attract new tenants. Real estate developers are hoping for a quick rebound with the growing population that is in need of housing.
In Uganda, of course, the population, we have the advantage of the population. The demand for residential housing is always there. Maybe the discrepancy would be which type of housing, upscale or low scale or affordable. But the demand is always there because the population keeps growing.
According to Uganda Bureau of Statistics, the country has a deficit of 1.2 million residential units per annum. But as the demand for housing units continues to rise, real estate developers like in Samba are striving to fill the gap. Hilara Yesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And heading to Ethiopia now, where a little-known crop could be the answer to food scarcity as climate change disrupts farming practices. Now, scientists say that NSET, otherwise known as the false banana plant, has the potential to feed more than 100 million people, and that's if it is cultivated across other countries in Africa. Here's CGTN's Beryl Oro with that report.
This is NSET, also known as the false banana plant. Virtually unknown outside of Ethiopia, but here it's a staple food for around 20 million people. And new research suggests it could be a solution to food shortages and famine caused by climate change.
So NSET is a really unusual crop in that you can plant it any time of year, you can harvest it any time of year. It's perennial, so it gets larger and larger each year. And what this combination of traits means is that farmers can use it when they need it. It allows them to buffer seasonal food insecurity. And that gives farmers real flexibility to try and tackle problems like acute food insecurity.
The false banana tree doesn't produce any edible fruit, unlike its wild relative, the banana tree. But every part of the tree is used either for cattle fodder or cooking. The root and the base are mashed to a pulp and fermented to make bread.
So as a species, most of what we use is a very small handful of the diversity of plants on Earth. So we get more than half our calories from just 3 species, rice, wheat, maize. What we're showing here is that NSET is one example of an amazing underutilized crops from Ethiopia that could have much wider potential to help us meet global challenges like food security.
NSET is believed to have first been identified in Ethiopia around 7,000 years ago. Although NSET grows wildly in other East African countries, nowhere else in the world is this a food source. It's mainly grown by communities in the south and southwest highlands of Ethiopia, and as a result, these people rarely experience famine. But scientists have discovered that it grows in the wild across a far wider area, so there is every chance it could become an agricultural crop in more countries.
NSET's really restricted distribution is something of a kind of mystery, right? So as a species, when crops are really useful and successful, they tend to spread around the world. So if you think of bananas, they started in Southeast Asia thousands of years ago, and now we find them, in almost every tropical country on Earth. So why hasn't NSET done the same thing? That's one of the mysteries we're trying to understand.
Many crops are threatened by climate change, hotter temperatures and less rainfall. Scientists say the predictability of weather patterns has changed, meaning some farmers are now looking at diversity. And NSET could be a solution. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up later on Global Business Africa, economic experts slam Sudan's 2022 budget that seeks to more than double tax revenues to replace foreign aid. Of course, more on that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to you.
Thank you, Uche. You're watching Africa Live. Coming up in sports. Mali and Equatorial Guinea to square off for last AFCON quarterfinal sport.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Mali will face Equatorial Guinea in the last round of 16 clash for a chance to make it to the quarterfinals.